I will be going through how I create projects for game dev. I use a combination of GitHub and Godot. The Godot project manager helps create the actual Godot project. The GitHub desktop app helps create the repository. So easiest way for me is if you don't have it, you download the GitHub desktop app from desktop.github.com/download. You want to make sure to also have Godot. You can get that from their website, godotengine.org. They have Windows, Linux, and Mac versions of everything. At least for Windows, it's an executable, really easy to use, no complicated setup. When you launch Godot, you'll have a project manager here. We have a bunch of different games already here, but we're going to create a new one. And this new game we're going to call Saloon Slinger, and make sure that that has the right folder. So we're going to select that folder. It'll create Saloon Slinger in that. We use compatibility because we have friends that play it on desktop, mobile, and web. So that they can play it, we make sure that it's compatible from the get-go. We'll click Create and Edit. That will create the Godot project in that folder, set everything up. Initially, it's blank canvas kind of thing, and it'll show up in the editor here. We'll jump into that later because at this point, we have the Godot project set up, and now we need to create the GitHub repository. So in the GitHub desktop app, you'll go into your current repository, click Add, Create New Repository, and this is where you can get tripped up a little bit. I get tripped up here every now and then. You want to type in the name of your project, so we'll do Saloon Slinger. Put a README in there, and make sure to choose the GitHub folder, not like GitHub/Saloon Slinger or whatever game name folder you gave it. So make sure to do whatever folder you put in your GitHub repo in that the Godot project was created in, you choose the parent folder, not the actual folder that the GitHub project was, or else you're going to be creating a second folder in that's your GitHub repository, and it gets confusing, and this keeps it nice and simple. We're going to not do the git ignore. They do have Godot things in there, but it hasn't hurt so far to not have it in there. So we'll click Create Repository. And then just to show what I mean there is in this GitHub folder that I have, Saloon Slinger is here, and it's all in there. We've got our Git attributes, Git ignore, even our Godot files, project files, and all that. They're all in the same folder instead of separate folders. So we'll go ahead and publish this repository. Still call it Saloon Slinger. Make it public. We like people to be able to see our code. And then put it in our Splashy Ink organization and click Publish. Now that that's published, we can see that in GitHub. We're in our repositories here, refresh the page, boom, we got Saloon Slinger. And that has all of our Godot project thingamajigs in it, and we are good to go for the next step of setting up the Godot game project for the type of game we're making. Now that we have the baseline Godot project as well as the GitHub project's repository set up, we can start to edit things in Godot, and we'll show setting up the project for the type of game we're making, which is a pixel art game, how we do it, not necessarily how everyone should do it, but it's how we do it, as well as committing that code into GitHub. And we'll show a really simple workflow for that one. So we're going to be making a game that's pixel art. The screen size doesn't necessarily need to be huge. And in order to be compatible with screens that are, let's say, common resolutions are 1280 by 720, 1920 by 1080, and then there's 1440p, which is some numbers that I don't really do a lot with. But if we make a default window size, a minimum window size of 640 long by 360 tall, that will scale times 2 is 1280 by 720, times 3 is 1920 by 1080, and then times, I believe, 4 is the 1440p. So it all scales up as an even number so that when we scale a single pixel up, we're not getting like half pixels and all of that. To do that, go in here to project settings, project settings, and then we will find our window setting under display. The default is 1152 by 648. I believe that's to account for having like slight margins on the top and the bottom because that's slightly off of 1280 by 720. So we'll go in here, we'll make the width 640 and the height 480, or sorry, 360. We'll start with windowed mode, make it resizable, that's all fine. And then what I like to do is turn on the advanced settings here. And I like to do an override because my monitors are 1920 by 1080. I like to do an override that's 1280 by 720 just so that I can see what the game's going to look like at larger resolutions. And that's like the minimum larger resolution that we expect to see, the 1280 by 720. So that'll allow the window to be bigger when we're developing on it, but we can always turn that override off to see what it looks like smaller. In addition to the window size here, we like to set up the stretch mode for canvas items, keeping the aspect ratio, but then we make the scale mode integer. What this does is it makes sure that it will only ever scale up when it's ×1, ×2, ×3, ×4. So you can only ever play the game in 640 by 360, 1280 by 720, 1920 by 1080, and 1440p. That makes it so that our art is very predictable in what it looks like while you're playing the game. So because when you have like half pixels and all of that, you get these sort of, like if you have eyes that are a single pixel on a character, they'll sort of get smushed or stretched and it looks a little weird. So that's how we like to set this up, at least in the display settings, to help avoid any weirdness when it comes to the art. And that's it for the display settings. Before we move on to changing any more settings, I want to talk about a little best practice that I have if you're using GitHub. When using GitHub, I like to make small commits often. So when you do a little chunk of something that makes a change that makes sense and can be a thing in its own, I like to push that up as a change because it's like clicking save as often as you can, but it's saving to the internet. Because in GitHub, you have the code changes that you make, which in here, we've made the window size change, and that changes the code in the Godot project automatically for you. It's a little UI here, but this UI is just making the code changes for you. So those changes that we made, I want to push those up to the internet and make sure that I don't lose them in case my computer just dies for some reason. Or if I punt it out a window and I'm upset with it, I don't know. So to do that, we're going to open up our GitHub desktop and we'll actually see the code changes in the project file that we just made using that UI. Then to push it up, my best practice that I like to do, it might not apply to everybody, but I like to make a branch for every specific thing that I change. Since we're doing a little mini game, I'm just going to make a branch that's for me. So I'll just put it in as like, let's do game code as the branch name. You can create a branch for project setup, making the character, making the environment, and that really lets people work on multiple different things at the same time, and then they can all come together as you merge the branches together in GitHub. But we'll create this branch called game code, and we'll bring the changes over to game code because we don't want to put them directly on the main branch. Once we have that branch created locally, we need to put our changes in and save them and then push that up to the internet. We'll go in here, we have our changes, we need to describe what we've done, so we are going to say set display project settings. So let's do configuration. And that's all we need to say. We can go into more detail if we want in the description, but really it's just like a quick little blurb of what you did. That way you can understand what you did in the future, or if you're working with someone else, they can say, oh, okay, this is what this should be doing. And if they want to like review what you did, they can verify that it all works as expected. So we'll click commit to game code. Game code's the branch, so we'll commit our code to the branch, and then publish our branch here. And that is now in the GitHub repository under that branch. So we'll see what that looks like in GitHub. You'll see here that it says game code had a recent push 2 seconds ago. We can go to our branches. If we click on the one branch thing there, we can see our game code branch. If we go back to main, we'll see that our project.godot doesn't have those changes we made. We made like a whole block of changes that talk about like the resolution and all of that. That's not on the main branch yet because we put it on our game code branch. So let's switch over to our game code branch, and boom, there it is. These are the changes we made. That's on the game code branch, but it's not on the main branch. So if we ever want to make it go over to the main branch so that someone who's doing the art can then pull from the main branch or whatever and get the latest of the latest, we would then go over to our game code branch. Sorry, we'd go over to pull requests. We have our game code recent pushes, so we will new pull request, compare it to game code, then go in here. Could do it that way, or even easier, when you have a bunch of changes committed up and you have no other changes that are like pending or anything, you can go in here and say create pull request right from the GitHub desktop app. So we're on a game code branch, and this will make sure that it's all your local stuff is going up there, and it automatically sets everything up for you. And usually the branch is, the name of, or the pull request is the name of the branch, or if it's just one commit like we have, it's just going to be this one thing. So easiest thing to do is just click create pull request. This will then stage everything for other people to look at and say, hey, this is what I changed. Let me know what you think before you actually push it into the main branch called merging. I like to just take a quick look at the files changed. I can read code pretty quickly. So I know what I changed here. I've done this a lot for a number of projects. So I know that this all looks good. But what you can do is you can actually pull the branch down, open it up in Godot, and then see if it actually did what it said it was going to do. So I viewed this, so I'm going to click that. And then I just go over and I merge it to the main branch. And there you go. I'm not going to delete the branch because we're just going to keep working on this game code branch. But we have our first pull request up. It's really cool. So we can then see in the main branch, our latest commit is to set the display project configuration. This was all merged in. And so in the main branch, whoever's doing the art, spouse doing the art, she can make her branch off of the main branch, the main code base, and she'll have these changes I made. So I just set up the project for both of us to work off of the same canvas, which is really nice when you're working on a project with other people. The next part of setting up the project for the type of game we're making is we've set up the display settings, but we also want to change the rendering settings. This is something that we do. It may not be the most correct, but it works for us. If we go down to rendering and then renderer, we see that we have GL compatibility. That's all looking good, but we want to go down to 2D. No, we don't. We are going to want to set up the texture settings. So if we go to textures, we're under rendering, textures, and then we'll have this whole section in here. We like to set this default texture filter to nearest. That makes it so that when you're displaying a texture at a higher resolution and everything, it just scales it up. It doesn't make it blurry or anything. It's very crisp into the pixels. In addition to that, we'll want to find our next setting, which is our rendering 2D. We will snap 2D transforms to pixel so that when things move in our game, they move based on they snap to a pixel. They don't go in between pixels so that everything displays nicely. As well as the 2D vertices, we're going to snap those to pixels as well. And this is because we're doing a pixel art game. If you're not doing a pixel art game, this might not apply. Or even if you are doing a pixel art game, it might not apply to you. It depends on what your project looks like. But give it a shot if that's what you are doing and see how it works. And then just to run through pushing the code up one last time, this is the last time we're going to go through doing that. Just assume every time we make a specific change, we're pushing that code up to the internet, just to run through it one last time. So those changes were all made. You can go ahead and close that. You don't have to, but I like to. And then we see our project settings here. So we can see our rendering settings for our texture and all that, and then this 2D snapping. So that's really nice. Do this, update rendering, spell it right, rendering settings for pixel art. Commit that to game code, push that up to the origin. The origin is the online code base. And so then we're good to go. So we just create another pull request, update rendering settings for pixel art, no other description needed, create that pull request, take a look at our files really quick. Yep, everything looks the way it's supposed to. And we go ahead and say we viewed it. We merge it in. And so now the project is completely set up so that other people can work on this project from the same. Imagine you're painting with multiple people. You're using the same canvas, you're all on the same dimensions, and everything's going to behave and look the same to everyone. That really makes it a lot easier so that when someone does code design or game design, they're implementing things and they're seeing things the way the art people intended for them to be seen, and the art people doing the art pop it in, and boom, it looks how it's supposed to. So yeah, that's how we like to set up a project, in particular for pixel art, but just in general.